Welcome to Sunspots, where we explore the many ways that the Holy Spirit is working in the people, places, ministries, and missions on the surface of the sun. That is, the Synod of the Sun. I'm Valerie Young, your Synod leader. My prayer is that you find inspiration, community, and connection in the sun.
Hello, and welcome back to Sunspots with the Synod of the Sun. I'm Elizabeth Brinegar. I am here with Natarsha Sanders and with Sarah Leer. I am glad that you have chosen to spend some time with us today. If you have not been able to listen to the first podcast that the three of us did together, I hope that you will take some time to do that, because it has given me so much food for thought. It is something that has stayed with my soul. So go back and check out The Educated Life. But today we are here to talk about what it is to be a child of God. What sort of being are we supposed to be? And I really want to be very conscious and separate being from doing, because we are children of God, period. And doing is something completely different. So let's jump in. What does this bring up for you?
Elizabeth,
Natarsha?
thank you for having us.
Thank you.
I am very grateful to be back with the Sunspots family. And I know Sarah is too, because we are the ones who would have said no if we could not or did not want to do this. So
True story. True story.
So gratitude, all gratitude to being here. I appreciate the distinction that you have already made at the head of this conversation between being and doing. They are very different, and we are human beings. And we, as Christians, have proclaimed that we belong to God.
Yes.
Not just that, but we also belong to one another. So how does loving our neighbor as we love ourselves look? And how does loving the Lord our God look? As we know, Jesus taught these were the two greatest commandments, right? And so how do those things look is what I really hear you asking from a biblical perspective and theological perspective. How can we do that? And how does it look in our lives? And so that is something that I'm definitely prepared to talk about. I want to make sure I'm on the right track before I start talking, because I can go. So I wanted to make sure my mind was thinking on the right track.
Yes.
Okay. So when we talked about the educated life, Elizabeth, I want to go back to some of those concepts that we brought up, because we did start talking about being and belonging there, because a lot of the work that both Sarah and I are doing in our educational research centers around belonging and being. So Sarah's work is really heavy into belonging and how we belong to one another. And my work really looks at being from a place of looking internally for your sense of being and awareness of who you are in order to know where you need to be, right?
Right.
So I think that when we make our distinction and when we make the proclamation that we are Christians, we be Christians, we are making a proclamation that our lives are no longer our own, and that we are submitting our will to that of Christ's will, God's will for our lives. And so in that, who am I to try to determine what I want to do when I be a Christian?
Right.
I'm going to unpack that a little bit more as we go in through the conversation, but I want Sarah to come in.
Yes, thank you.
Ooh, Natarsha, so much. I mean, you always give me so many different things to think about. I was struck just now when you said that your work is focused on being, and you have such a beautiful inward focus about, and you help remind me to connect my doing and my being to the spirit and to what the triune God is calling me to do, us to do in our lives collectively and individually. And when you said that, it struck me as my work does really connect to belonging. And all of a sudden I thought that really comes from a place of privilege on my part, right? Like, because I have always felt like I belong in Presbyterian circles. And so that's what made me think of that as a white woman and as somebody born into a place of with power and privilege just by the virtue of my skin tone in the United States. I could walk around my church community and like downtown where Elizabeth and I grew up in Arkansas. And I was like, I belong here, right? And so I think you're just helping me reveal things, but that felt like a sense of belonging that I want other people to feel. And I think that is at the root of my work. However, that is not innate in our system. And that is not innate in the PCUSA. And I've talked to so many colleagues who come from different social locations than I do, who feel that on the daily. And our particular system has so much work to do in terms of the being and the belonging, right? Because those two are connected. But I'm really glad you brought that up, because that makes me feel like, why is that rooted in? And I think it's because I always felt like that, like since I was 3, right? Like I could run that church and nobody would bat an eye.
At 3, right? And you know what? At 3.
She's always been like this.
Yeah. This is why we say representation matters, because in a lot of ways you were able to walk around and see yourself outside of yourself. So when you looked around at church, you saw, oh, that could be me, that could be me, that could be me. And so, yes, you could see yourself in those places. Today, as someone who is Presbyterian PCUSA, I have to peel back layers and I have to find where I belong. I have to find where, according to Presbyterianism, where I'm supposed to be, right? I can't just look. In looking and being able to see representation, it is a privilege. And so acknowledging that is really important. But I have to find that. And I think it's really powerful when you think about someone as a 3-year-old knowing and being able to feel that belonging and wanted to share it with others. As someone who feels that and wants to keep it for themselves. That's the difference between power.
Thank you.
Power is about, can be about owning something like a sense of belonging and saying, ooh, I want other people to feel this. This is a good thing. It can also be, ooh, I want to keep this to myself. It's a good thing. And there's
keep that close.
Keep it close. There's a distinction that needs to be made there. As Christians, I do believe that when we follow the life that Jesus lived, that we are looking to disrupt powerful systems.
Yes.
And distribute power in a stable way.
Yeah. I appreciate so much of what you've said. And it part of the work I'm doing right now also brings up the disciples, and especially in Mark, because they run around like they're chickens with their heads cut off. And and they are so insider outsider, right? And in the Gospel of John, we know that's a theme, right? There's so much and problematic, right?
Yeah.
Because when you start looking at light and dark themes, that can be very much connected to white supremacy in a heartbeat. But looking at Mark, the disciples, I mean, they're just running around the whole gospel, but a couple of different instances, right, where Jesus says, let the little children come to me, and the disciples are like, I don't know that you want those little grubby hands on you, Jesus. And he's like, no, I do, even though they're sticky. And so that is one example. Another example, feeding people. Jesus like, we can feed people. And the disciples do exactly what you said, Natarsha. They were like, well, maybe we should make sure that we okay, right? This is my interpretation of like, this is my reading the Greek.
You're
right
paraphrasing.
now. This is my paraphrasing.
That's them wanting to hold on to their power.
Yes.
Hold on. Yes. And Jesus flips it subverts power constantly and says, we're going to feed the people. So y'all need to get on board, right? This is what's happening today. So this is the story we're going to tell. And that story makes it in, right?
Yeah.
There's how many of those stories didn't make it in, right? Is part of our question as theologians and educators, but that story makes it in, which means it's important. And I'm just struck by how the disciples were, keep it. We got to keep this to ourselves.
Yeah. And the thing about noting the fact that, and this is just coming to me now, that Jesus fed the people there and the disciples were against it, was that the people belonged there. And by feeding them
point.
where they were with Jesus, Jesus is displaying and showing the disciples how people belong.
Yes, exactly.
They cannot stay in a place where their basic needs are not being met. And Jesus is saying, these people belong where they are.
Exactly, which is why I use it as an example in some of the work I'm doing, because that is part of inclusion and belonging, right?
Yeah.
Like, what is that? That's that distinction.
Yeah.
So no, exactly. These and meeting people where they are, which
hungry.
is part of our call, and hungry. Like people
they showed up, they didn't have their lunch, they didn't have food for whatever reason. Jesus said, we're gonna make sure they eat. They're here.
And the reason doesn't matter.
It doesn't.
The reason why they don't have food doesn't matter.
It doesn't.
Right.
That's not something that we're good at overlooking. I think a lot in this society.
That's true, because we like to ask why, and when we do that, it helps us be able to blame when we know why, because we want to blame. And when we can blame, we can kind of wiggle our way. We can use logic to wiggle our way out of having to love our neighbor.
I
think it also displays that we don't love ourselves.
Right.
I mean, that's love your neighbor as you love yourself. Right.
Well, and I think it also speaks to our need to place blame. Because if you don't have food, is that your fault? And if that's your fault, then I have nothing to do with that.
Stay
even
hungry.
though we live in a system that benefits me.
Correct.
Right. So.
And if I can do it, you can do it.
Exactly. But we know that's not the reality.
It is not the reality. And talking about belonging, when you go to a place that you've been invited to and you're told you don't belong or you're not wanted, that's even more painful.
Right.
And so again, the fact that Jesus went out of his way and went against common systems, the systems that were in place during his time walking the earth, to demonstrate belongingness and being is something that we can really, really take from. I mean, he did it almost every time. He shifted power and demonstrated how the people around him belonged where they were supposed to be. And we've named a few examples. There's so many more that we could go into about that. Another one is when Jesus was on his way to go see Lazarus, Belonging, the disciples did not want him to go back because they just tried to kill him. And they was like, don't you go back over there, they're going to try to kill you. Jesus is like, no, I love him. I love Lazarus and I love Mary and Martha. And I'm going back because that is where I belong.
Yes.
Even though, see, Mary and Martha invited him to come back. The people around him who were trying to kill him in that community did not want him there, even though Mary and Martha and Lazarus had extended the invitation, an open invitation, right? Out of love for Jesus. But then here we have the community saying, we don't want you here, even though he was invited, right? And there is an example that we can pull from today.
Yes.
That looks just like this. If we look at Presbyterian College in South Carolina, who invited the Howard University women's lacrosse team to compete against them in lacrosse, they were invited. When they got there, they were met with jeers and racist taunts. We don't want you here. We'll do violent things to you with guns, leave, saying all kinds of things to the people who were just invited to come and play in a lacrosse competition. So what do we do with that when we have been invited to a place, but we're not received in the very place that we've been invited?
Right.
And what does that say for our sense of belonging?
Right. Well, and I think one of the big problems for me about the Presbyterian College situation, which is an atrocity, that's a sin. We're going to name a sin a sin. One of my problems with that is that the students are still there. The students who perpetrated this are still there. And I think that is another thing that speaks to our system and who our systems are set up to protect, who our systems are set up to take care of.
Well, they belong there, Elizabeth. Where else would you expect them to? They belong there. They belong in Presbyterianism.
Yeah.
They belong at Presbyterian College. So where else would they go?
Right.
To a white supremacist group?
Thank you for calling me out on that.
They belong there. So, and the powers that be are responsible for educating them. The challenge is this, though. What are we teaching at our colleges and seminaries and universities where students feel okay to do this, to say these things?
Great point.
Without fear of punishment. What is on the syllabus, on the syllabi? What are we reading?
Right.
What are our professors teaching? And the caution is to not hire a DEI professional to come in and try to undo hundreds of years worth of racism. Don't put all of that on one person, because it is not one person's job. You do need a DEI professional, Presbyterian College, but it's not their work to undo all that has come to head in this one moment.
The community is going to need to do that work.
Yes.
The DEI professional can guide and instruct and offer whatever that pathway may be, but the community is going to have to do the work.
Yeah.
And 1 second, can you tell us what DEI stands for, please, real fast?
Diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Thank you very much.
And sometimes people say JEDI, with justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion.
Oh, I love that.
Thank you. Yeah.
It's not just PC. It is PC, but it's not just PC. There's so much work to be done in our theological institutions as well. Willie James Jennings' book is, it's excellent in this. And he talks about theological education. And we talked about that a little bit in part one, when we talked about our own experiences. But there's so much work, so much to be unearthed, right? And so much in the institution. And I think it comes back to belonging.
It
and
does.
the curriculum. I mean, Natarsha and I are educators, right? And we happen to both be people who love curriculum analysis. And that anti-colonial, because Dr. Hong has cautioned in some of the work that she has done that decolonization, and there's a lot of work about this, but she says decolonization is giving land back. Ooh, that Decolonial Futures is her book that Natarsha's holding up. And she talks about it often, as do other
Scholars.
Scholars, thank you. But, you know, when you're looking at, so I like to use anti-colonial, but there's so much work that can be done when you really go through the curriculum at our institutions. What are we teaching? Who are we centering? Whose stories are we telling?
Correct.
Right.
And so there is a lot to be unpacked there that doesn't rest on the shoulders of one person. So that's my main point. Like, there's a lot of deep digging that can be done to show us and to guide us to how we got to this place where these students feel comfortable saying these things to other human beings who've been invited to their campus, and also why they're still there, right? Like we can do all of that, and I guarantee it's in some syllabus and in some curriculum and in some handbook somewhere with some language.
Right. I mean, for
especially
example,
in this institution in the South.
Right. I mean, for just one basic example, as a graduate of a different Presbyterian institution of higher education, so two of the required courses we had to take were Western civilization. There was nothing about civilization, south of the border. There was nothing about any other continents. It's written into the system.
It is.
I was thinking about that the other day too with my high school education, which we took AP European history. I didn't think anything of it, but that was just one of the AP offerings. That's it. I was like, wait a minute. Like, yeah, that is our option. I mean, that is how many AP credits would you like? Do you want to advance your GPA, quote unquote? Like, what, well, this is an offering.
Yeah.
European history.
So what we're saying as educators is, and as curriculum writers, and some people, women who are drawn to the importance of education and the value of education, is that it can do a lot of good and it can do a lot of harm. And the powers that be get to determine which way we're going to go. The challenge is getting the powers that be to understand the depth and the importance of what's happening in both in and out of the classroom. Because when you're at a university, most of the learning takes place outside of the classroom. Let's be real and let's be honest. So what as administrators of a university, of colleges, there is a responsibility to always be teaching. There's always a lesson to be learned in everything. So they get to think about, what do we want our students to learn from this example? And what do we want to learn? And what do we want to teach from this example?
And Natarsha, something you said earlier struck me too, about inviting folks to come and play, right? Which happens all the time in small institutions, larger institutions. And particularly this institution we're talking about, another Presbyterian institution, you are inviting children of God to your space. That is the frame, right? Like, that's it. You're inviting human beings, people who are children of God, to be part of your space. I mean, there's a game happening, sure, that's secondary. How are you inviting children of God into your space? And that happens in churches, that happens in faith communities, that happens at your community potluck, that happens every day.
And then yes, Sarah, and then to take that to the next step, you've invited them, but then how do we know we're welcome or not welcome?
How do you, and this is a question that has come up in my work, right? How do you get out of the car, off the train, off the bus, down the sidewalk, however you got there, whatever your mode of transportation was? What makes you open that car door, right? What makes you turn that corner, get off at that bus stop?
How are we signaling? That is absolutely a beautiful question.
Because your body is going to a place that is not yours if you've been invited into a different space. Your being and your embodied self, your divine spark is going to that space. And how do you know that you are going to be safe in body and spirit?
Exactly. Well, and I think that the Presbyterian College situation, that is overt. That is overtly a problem. But I think we also need to take it down.
Sinful.
42. It's sinful. We need to take it down 42 levels and think about the different ways that we perpetuate the same sin. Where we don't even, number one, realize we're doing it, but number two, where it might not look like it on the surface, but it is sinful and shameful.
Let's do that.
Let's do it.
Because what we have here is are people who identify as women who are in a male-dominated industry. How have we been invited into spaces, but then told we weren't welcome as soon as we got there? Come on, pay disparities. Time off from work.
Yes.
Right. Family leave.
Right.
Short-term disability hoops that you need to jump through.
Yeah, all of that. And then how has the church, the Presbyterian church, how have we sought to address those disparities that we know exist, that we know exist and that are harming our people of God? In what ways? Because when I think about Jesus going back to see Lazarus, he knew that those people hadn't changed their hearts toward him. Jesus knew they were still going to try to throw rocks at him.
Right.
But his focus was on getting back to see his friends whom he loved. So what we're doing is saying, yes, you are Christian, come over here. I know stones will be thrown at you, and I probably will be one of the ones throwing the stones, but I'm still inviting you. I'm inviting you, but you're not welcome.
Wow.
That is harmful. It's harmful when we invite people to preach in our pulpits.
Yes.
And tell them we want them to hear what they have to say, but then rip them apart when they are not preaching the gospel like we learned it in our seminary.
In the line out to the narthex, right? Like in the line, you have comments to share with your guest preacher. This happened to so many colleagues of ours. And on your way to like the Chinese buffet or wherever you're going to go get lunch at the Chili's, and you are walking out, it's my Arkansas coming through. You're going to walk out and have comments on the way out the door.
On the person you invited.
Yes. Happens all the time, y'all.
So that's something that we can really think about. And I feel like that is a tangible example for all people, because no matter who you are, no matter where you go to church, you have had or been a guest, you've had guests in your congregation. How do you respond to that guest, knowing that they're invited? How do you extend them a welcome?
Right.
Well, and there's so many examples, right? And there's also things that I don't think congregations think about. Again, this connects to the work I'm doing, so it's on my mind. But you invite somebody trans or non-binary into your space, what are your bathrooms, right? Do you have a particular space where you're inviting that person to robe? If you're inviting like somebody who's a pastor or going to give you a sermon or going to teach a class. Alex McNeil talks about this a lot. What are the bathroom situations? How stressful that is for people. What are the spaces you have for folks who have never been to your space before, right? Who are like figuring out the parking situation or the transportation situation. I always note in the bulletin how much description you give, because if it is, or what you say, right? Because it's always like, well, we're going to go, the place we always go. Like, we're going to walk down to the fellowship hall and have a little meet and greet. Well, I've never been here. I don't know where the fellowship hall is. Right? Like, I don't know that the custom and the culture of this church is to go and do XYZ. I don't know that we stand at this time and sing this song. Like, people don't know. I mean, and if someone comes to your space and they're expected to just automatically know your cultural cues,
right,
they're not welcome.
Right. And that could just be a visitor, right? Yeah. That may not even be part of your leadership.
Yeah.
But then you're like, wow, that person never came back. Like,
yeah.
Right.
Or I think about people who've had babies that cry during service, right?
Oh,
and then they get these looks and stares from who I have said in the middle of a sermon, in the middle of announcements, in the middle of stuff, that baby is okay.
Yes.
I've said, praise the Lord, honey. Praise the Lord. I've looked at the parents and I've said, they okay. Let everything that has breath praise the Lord. To break that up.
Yes.
Because on the one hand, see, this again speaks to the invitation versus the welcome, right?
Right.
On the one hand, we're inviting younger families. Come on, families, let's grow the church. Let's be on the forefront for Jesus, and we grow in the church. But the welcome, once they get in and they baby cried or they toddler is fidgety and running up and down the aisles, we want to send them away into a nursery somewhere where that is not necessarily welcoming.
Right.
It can be if it's done in a kind way. Like,
I'm just over here writing down things that you're saying and putting them on Post-it notes in front of me. Hold on.
There is a place. I don't want people to hear me say that I don't think that nurseries in a church are appropriate, right? I'm not saying that. What I am saying is if a mom and a dad or parents want to worship with their children, no matter the age, that should be okay in the sanctuary.
And God put wiggles in the children. I mean,
me too. Put wiggles in me.
Put wiggles in me. It is children of all abilities, children of all shapes and sizes. And, one of my favorite things to say to people, and I'm sure people have given me all kinds of looks. I'm sure people talked about me behind my back for this one. But I'm always like, children, the sound of children is the sound of a living congregation.
Yes. Thank you.
It is. And I love it. Like, I will do my work to the sound of children playing. And don't let a child be playing by themselves. And they how they get the little cars and get the little Legos and start talking to them and stuff. Listen, I can knock down a lot of assignments.
Right.
I love it. I love it.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that.
So yes, it is the sign of a living congregation. There's a life there. So we should not we should not invite people if they're not welcome. That's all I'm saying. So perhaps Presbyterian College, Howard University should not have been invited because they were harmed by you in this, and all they did was say yes to an invitation to come and play lacrosse.
Right.
That's it. So maybe y'all need to do some sort of exchange where the students go to Howard and learn for a semester.
I love it.
Take them out of their comfortable context.
well, now I'm going to go into an anti-colonial view of mission, which may not be where you want to go, Elizabeth.
Hey, go.
Okay. Well, I always think about a workshop I went to that Lindsay Anderson led, and she's up in Detroit. And her congregation, she's like, bring your youth here. We'll have them hang out for a week in Detroit and be present in this community. And it's not about going somewhere else, not bringing your like very white youth group, to go paint a wall somewhere, which like youth ministry is guilty of everywhere.
Right.
But an anti-colonial view, right, of being present in that community. And I mean, I'd follow Lindsay Anderson to the ends of the earth, but I think that like, that's such a beautiful, and she's like, look, call me, right? Like, this is the work that we can do together to be together. And it is not about fixing another community.
Correct.
Because the solutions, again, because I love me some asset-based community development, solutions are already living there, right? Already like exist in communities. It's following the lead of people who live there every day. So if you want to come in and use your power and resources,
come in and be quiet.
Yeah.
And follow the lead of leaders.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's what that is, again, that now that could have very well been what those students were doing, following the lead of leaders.
Ooh.
Good point.
Ooh.
Good point.
You see?
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I say, Elizabeth, when you said like you were troubled by the fact that they were still there, my question back to you was, well, isn't that where they belong?
Mm-hmm.
Because they very well could have been following the lead of leaders. There's in a lot of our community, we talk about the impact that being enslaved for generations upon generations have had to the current psyche of people. And there's a lot of studies that have been put on Black folk, put on Native folk, put on Hispanic people, Latino, Latinx people, put on non-white, BIPOC. I would like to suggest that the same trauma that has in studies that have been put on us have been put on white folk. So when you think about the what is going on in your brain that makes you say everywhere you step belongs to you, or you own people, and that is being passed down, I do believe, which is why we can see people running down people who are in a neighborhood running and hunt them down like an animal and shoot them. Talking about you taking up for you looking, you neighborhood watch. It happened with Trayvon. It happened with Ahmaud. It continues. It happened with Breonna. You're doing this kind of crazy stuff. Study yourself. Let's figure out why these teenagers and these young adults at Presbyterian College felt empowered to do that. What are they listening to in the classroom and at the kitchen table? What's being passed down? What is the makeup of their brain that suggests I'm about to do this and this is right?
And instead, this place belongs to me, right? Is the frame. Instead of we belong to each other.
Correct.
Right.
And that's what Christ taught and teaches. We belong to one another. That's why Christ said, love your neighbor as you love yourself, because we belong to one another and we all belong to God equally.
Which is hard.
It's hard. And it's also what you said when we started, right? Natarsha was like, we belong to each other. And what kind of world would it be? What kind of kingdom? Shout out to Moy Harista Theology for that one. What kind of kingdom do we enact on the earth when we walk around? What if your mantra were, we belong to each other, just all day?
Right.
It shows up so differently.
Right.
Mhm.
Well-
There are some things that I allow people that I know I belong to and belong to me say to me that other people would not get away with saying.
Right.
Right. There are some places inside of me that academically and on an intellectual place, and even in a friendship way, when Sarah's saying, well, I'm not sure. Okay, she about to tell me something I did just sucked. Okay. Right?
That is the way she says it.
Never.
That's because
I would never.
we have made an agreement. We understand what it means to belong to each other. And that accountability. When you belong to someone, you let them, they have permission to hold you accountable to everything.
Right.
Right. And I have learned from you that when, in our 4 years now, that when you stop and pause and you say, have you thought about? No, the answer is I have not thought about it because it was not what I should have said or done or written. Like, you are right. And I must say 99.8% of the time, you are correct. But
you see how you learn each other's language when you are seeking to belong.
Yes. Yes.
When you're invited and welcome. It looks different.
Sarah, I would ask you, and tell me if I've gone too far and we can edit this out, but I would ask you, when Natarsha says, have you thought about this?
Right.
When Natarsha says, have you thought about this? Is the answer no, because I haven't had to?
Sometimes, often, Natarsha's so smart. She's just brilliant, but she's also super intuitive, and she knows me well. And sometimes it's because I haven't had to, but sometimes it's just because she's smarter than I am, and she will bring something up. And I was like, well, I've never even thought about that. But part of the reason that I love my friendship with her, but also our working relationship, is that Natarsha comes from a different social location than I do. And her lived experience as a Black woman, as an educator, because she's had experience in the public school systems and I have not, she brings things up that I have not thought about. Partly just because of her lived experience. And often that is generally my cue just to listen.
Right.
And I know she loves me. Like she said, we have accountability. But sometimes sometimes I say stuff out of power and privilege that yes, I haven't had to think of it.
Right.
And Natarsha will very gently call me in, as opposed to being called out publicly. Like that'll be lovely. That's a Dr. Hong shout out too.
Lovely.
But she will call me in because we are in relationship with each other. So we're on the phone with each other at whatever time.
And for however long.
And for however long. And I'll be like, yeah, you're right. I shouldn't say that again. I'll make a note of that. But I have learned a lot from our cohort. And I mean, not just Natarsha, but other cohort members. We have, I don't know, should I tell the tree story?
Let's not tell the tree story.
All right. Well, I will say this. We have cohort mates, and I have learned over the years to just listen, right? And to recognize that I am a person with power and privilege in that space, and I need to drop back, like right now. If I were not, but that's something I've learned. That was something in seminary part 1 when we were there, Elizabeth. I I didn't do a lick of dropping back. Like, not at all.
True story.
But then, like lived experience, right? From now to then. And like who we with this go round? Who these 10 people?
Exactly.
And there's some reckoning that has had to take place.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There is a story about we were doing theater. Is it Theater of the Oppressed?
Yes. Augusta Boyle. Yeah.
Okay. That you could tell about you and 2 of our other cohort mates where you were like, no, I'm not going to do that. Oh, yes, I am, because you've asked me to.
Okay. So we're doing this, and I told this on Natarsha's podcast. So this is not like, this is not a new story for Natarsha by any means. So I'll just speak for myself. So we were reading Patrick Reyes's book, Nobody Cries When We Die. It's incredible. I've already talked about that book, but just the more we can buy Patrick's book, like just y'all buy it. And we were given the instruction through the lens of Theater of the Oppressed by Dr. Dawson and Dr. Hong to pick out a section or maybe a paragraph or a line that really struck us and then enact it. And when you enact it, when you embody it, mostly in a tableau, you're not speaking words. There is something that comes from that. There's power and liberation. That would be Boyle's goal, right? That you are going to encounter liberation through that. So we read this passage, and Patrick Reyes is talking about his Chicano heritage in Northern California, and how when he returned to his Chicano American community, and how there were people who were harvesting vegetables, and he was getting higher education on the East Coast, and it was that back and forth and that tension he experienced. Mm-hmm. And so we picked this passage with me and 2 of our cohort mates who are Black, and I'm in that group of 3. And I mentioned on our last podcast, our cohort is mostly people of color, and am in this triad, and they said, let's enact this part about people harvesting and what that looks like. And then Patrick Reyes talks about white folks counting money on the other side of it. So my classmates, right, cohort mates, said, you are going to count money and we are going to harvest. And this is a tableau. You're not speaking any words, right? And I was like, no, because I can see it happening in my head. And I was like, no, this is not going to be good. And they were like, this is what we're going to do. And I said, okay. And I'm thinking about all my unlearning that I was doing in this class of like sitting back and listening. And I'm thinking about all the reading I have done, all these books that over the last 2 years, we've been like, you need to read this book. Well, like, you got to put the book into action, y'all.
Mm-hmm. Woo, put a pin right there. Okay, go ahead. Book in action. If you're going to read Me and White Supremacy, which I do love that book, then you got to enact it. Mm-hmm. But it's hard, but you have to do it. People are dying. Anyway, I could talk about that all day long. That'll be part 3. Enacting what we've read.
Oh, thank you.
Oof. So anyway, we're on the stage at Columbia, like there's that smaller room, that smaller stage in that new building. And we're there. And I'm on the stage with 2 people who are harvesting food, miming the raking and the harvesting and the picking. And I am counting money on stage silently, right? And
sitting with her legs crossed.
Yeah. And our professors are like, you can see them tense up. I mean,
the whole room tensed up.
The whole room. Yeah, I can't speak for Natarsha watching it, but people were like, this is not happening.
Right.
But it was happening. And it was very quick, right? Like these tableaus were short.
Yeah. Like a minute.
And Dr. Hong looked at me and she said, Sarah, you looked really uncomfortable doing this. And I said, I was really uncomfortable, but I was asked to do this by my classmates. and I listened, and Natarsha said, this is like early on in our friendship, and she said, as you should. I was like, yeah. Yep.
Because also these people are older, like they could be our parents.
Oh, okay.
The age, like the age. So it's like that dynamic is there as well.
Layers, right? Layers of inaction, of like, I'm sorry, interaction, like layers of what this was. So I sit down and I'm like really shaken by this whole experience. And people are up there doing their tableaus, and it's beautiful. And we're having good conversations and like enacting Patrick Reyes's book. And I drove back. I was staying a ways away during that time. And so I had a lot of time in the car in Atlanta traffic. And I was like, this was really terrible. Like this, I am shook, as the kids would say. So I just took like an hour of driving, and I was just like, I am not okay. Right. So it took me about 24 hours. Like I was just like digging into why I was so shaken and visibly just uncomfortable. And part of it is because I said to the class after we did this, I said, well, I was really uncomfortable doing this, and da-da-da-da-da. Dr. Hung was like, thank you for sharing that. And I said, this was really hard. And she was like, thank you for sharing that. And we just kept going. And I was driving later that day, and I thought, hey, what is going on with me? Like, I am not okay. And I drove back again. I had like the hour. So I drove back and I talked to Natarsha, and again, it's like 24 hours. And I said, I think I have always been comforted in spaces like this. Like if I am uncomfortable, someone has always stroked my ego, said something to comfort me, coddled me in some kind of way. Some kind of authority figure has always done that. Mm-hmm. And that was one of the first times, if not the first time, that I've encountered someone saying, sit with, I mean, that's what Dr. Hong said without saying it. Sit with it.
Mm-hmm.
Be uncomfortable.
Be uncomfortable. And that has set the tone for the program for me. Natarsha and I have talked about this story a lot because it really is telling. I feel like I'm a pretty educated person, but I come into this space and there's so much unlearning I had to do.
Right.
And how often are we comforted, white people, people with power, how often are we comforted when we are uncomfortable?
All the time.
All the time.
All the time. Wow. Well, my last question was going to be, how do we move from invited to belonging? But that is so much more than what we can do right now. And I think
part 3.
Yeah. So there might be a part 3. There might be. And there might be a part 47. We don't know. That's part of the beauty of life. You don't know.
How do we move from invited to belong? Natarsha, how would you tackle that? You don't.
I would have to say, first of all, know who you are inviting.
Mm-hmm.
And determine within yourself before you extend the invitation if you want them in your space.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't, then I invite you, and you are welcomed to do the work of figuring out why you don't want them in your space.
Mm-hmm.
Because if it's your space, then you have the power, that's one of PCUSA's favorite words, and authority to say you are not welcome here. Because the building belongs to, the different congregations and stuff, but the church belongs to God. So we can determine who comes to our buildings.
Yeah.
Do the work of why you don't want those people or that person there if you determine that they are not welcome. But that work should be done before an invitation is extended.
Right. Well, and I think part of it is that we also need to remember who extended the first invitation, because it was not any of us.
Come on.
It was not any one of us. It was God. And when we forget that, when we move away from that, that's where the sin happens.
Yes.
That's where the sin happens.
There's
Sarah?
there's so much. No, there's just so much. But part of it for me also is I just keep thinking about Christina Cleveland and how Dr. Cleveland, when she's invited into a space, she will send out a Google Doc, I think, but she'll send out a document that will ask what work you've done in your space and in your community.
Mm-hmm. She makes you think before she even agrees to enter your space. And that, thanks to her, that is a practice that thanks to her showing me that, Dr. Christina Cleveland, for showing me that, and for being in spaces in which I was invited but not welcome. I know how to do that now. Dr. Christina Cleveland, God is a Black Woman.
That's her new book, right?
This is her new book.
Nice.
Beautiful.
That's a really beautiful art.
Time to call the independent bookstore and place an order.
Yes. And you can order, or you can order it directly from her website.
Oh, good. Okay.
And I'm sure there'll be a book study coming up with that. Just be on the lookout.
We love a book study. We love a book study.
Get this. Not only will there be a book study, but there will be an opportunity to take action based on what has been read, because I am tired of people reading books to say that they've read the book. That has been very harmful to me in so many instances.
Right.
But I invite those who would even consider the title, God is a Black Woman, to get that book.
Thank you. All right, guys, I think we're kind of at the end of our time, as we are over 50 minutes. Yay. And Thomas is going to tell me again.
Join into
part 3, where we talk about moving to action. Yay. So thank you guys so much for your time today, Sarah and Natarsha. I really appreciate it. And we'll talk to you later.
All right.
Thank you.
In the Synod of the Sun, we believe when we work together across boundaries, we make visible the good news and find wholeness as the body of Christ. In our common calling, we impact lives together. So let's remember to connect with, equip, and empower one another in the name of Jesus Christ, today and every day.